I mean, to talk louder about bigger fruit and less loudly about smaller fruit would be analogic, you see. This, I think, Porpoises might be quite capable of. To give an image, drawing it or whatever,
dancing
is what's called iconic, or dancing it, which is what the bee does. What the bee does is a sort of mixture of analogic and iconic. He goes he's working on a vertical plane, and he uses the vertical plane as the position of the sun when he was flying. That's right? And on that vertical plane, he does a dance. He does a dance like that. And as he does that rising piece, he wiggles his tail. Now, the angle between that rising piece and the vertical is the angle that he had to the sun when he flew to get the food. And the number of wiggles in his tail as he does it is proportional to the distance the food is away. That's correct, isn't it? I haven't read the bee stuff for a long time. And I believe there's a certain amount of now known dialects among bees. They alter the sickle system somewhat.
Italian bees don't talk to the African bees?
Probably not. Well, I mean, these are inside the hive communications, which means fairly idiosyncratic, culturally limited system. Yeah. And there's no reason to believe they learn them, and reason to believe in dialectal contrasts
How much
between
of
them.
that might be passed on through the DNA to the previous and into the pattern of the individual hive?
Oh, well, now you're opening up a new subject altogether.
Okay, I'll back up.
But I'd like to say one word about your DNA question. Namely, are you asking me, do the DNA determine the details of the signal, or do the DNA determine the bee's ability to learn the signals? Or etc. I mean, I've got to see a regress of questions there, which geneticists usually avoid rather carefully. And my suspicion for human behavior, which is in the end what you're asking about, and not bees at all, and this is one of the reasons we study bees, because we think they're sort of degenerate people, especially ants. What? Especially what?
New York.
That's right. They say ants are cheap, mass-produced articles. That's a good say. The thing is, you see, that probably, first of all the characterological adjectives we use about people, courageous, spiteful, greedy, generous, hoarding, these are 1,000 adjectives, yes? These adjectives are all at the level of describing interaction. If you want to spell out what the adjective means, stingy, you are in fact pushed back to the place where I started from, namely you have to tell a little story. And these adjectives are all relational adjectives to be carried by stories, and because they are of that nature, if you really want to define them, the best way to do so is to talk about learning and to construct a narrative of a context of learning, which would be the context in which the adjective would be acquired. No, that didn't get across. I set up a learning experiment. And I'm going to have a rat press a bar to get meat powder, whatever rats get, something. Having done that, I noticed how many trials it takes and so on. And I'm now going to teach a rat to pull a rope in order to get something else that he desires, sex. And so on. I will vary the items, but keep constant the relation between them. The system of contingencies, of conditions, by which the rat gets what he wants or doesn't get what he wants, right? Or prevents punishment, or whatever. All right. In this way, and rats are not awfully good, dogs are better, and human beings are much better. In this way, I'm going to create an organism which thinks its world has this sort of connection in it, this sort of story. That is, it will be a calculating rat, or a manipulating rat, or a cautious rat.
Also a generous rat, a stingy rat.
That's right, according to the contingency patterns of the learning context which I give it. And whether what he learns in that context is pressing a bar or scratching his ear, it doesn't matter. Not much. What matters is the formal crystal structure of the context, the if-then structure. The simple case. We got a rag. We can't have a kitchen and no rag. There must be a rag somewhere here. Oh, a beautiful rag, yeah. Thank you, sir.
Is it what?
No, it's pretty good. It wasn't wetted. The Pavlovian system, you have a buzzer, which is incidentally called a conditioned stimulus, isn't it? Right. You have a meat powder, which is called unconditioned stimulus in their language. Russian's a little different from and somewhere here you have salivation. And salivation is called the conditioned response. Now, the contingency pattern is if this, then this, with a fixed time between them. And this is not within the contingency pattern. This is fixed. The experimenter is geared that way. The universe has that sort of sequence in it. All you can do if you're that rat is to look at the stars and determine when the reinforcements are coming. You can't do anything to make them come. You can prepare for them by making your mouth a little more juicy when they come. On the other hand, if you're a good American rat, the experimenter gives you a stimulus and a reinforcement, and here you have an action of some kind, a response. And the contingencies are if this, then this, and if this and this, then that. And that's quite a different sort of philosophy. If you think the world's made up that way, you'll be a different sort of a rat. People will say you have a different character.
So how do I become a open-handed rat?
Well, you could, to begin with, are you? I mean, if you are, then the question doesn't arise. A second method of becoming an open-handed rat is to inherit, perhaps, the genes which make it easier for you to learn to be an open-handed rat.
That isn't DNA.
Yes, it is. The probability is that the DNA work at the level of determining these patterns of learning, but they do not work at the level of determining the content. So that the same source goes into certain sorts of mathematics that goes into certain sorts of music.
Well, can the patterns of learning become part of biology?
Part of biology?
Yeah.
I take it they are.
I mean, once they're established, the American rat.
You mean, can you have a breed of American rats which will feel out of place when they go to Russia? I'm sure, personally, I'm willing to bet that the experiment is not easy.
It probably
The meta-level experiments are very difficult even to design. But I will bet that you can make rats which will have a difficulty in transferring from one of those to the other. All rats have some difficulty that way. And there are certain difficulties. It's noteworthy and characteristic that this type of experiment goes to autonomic responses, and this type of experiment goes to what are called voluntary responses. These are unstriped muscle responses and these striped muscle responses. It's very difficult to get a rat to salivate in order to make food. This is always one of the problems with prostitution, you see.
hook me.
To use semi-autonomic responses in order to get money. It's distasteful to the human being to do that.
It's a form of enslavement. It's a form of enslavement.
That's right. We call that enslavement. It is, of course. But just to make you work is not exactly enslavement.
It's an act of will or whatever.
What am I doing? I'm building up a set of formal ways related to stories, related to contexts of learning, and so forth. And I'm going to be looking in the build-up of all this material at this sort of level for rules of what's possible and what's not possible and so on. To a sort of philosophy of how philosophies can be built. If we say this rat has one philosophy, this rat has another philosophy, then I'm interested not just in those typologies, I'm interested in standing off and asking the next question, which is, how are these related? Are they in opposition to each other? What are the processes which go this way, the processes which go that way, and so on. And this is the sort of thing you're going to get when epistemology ceases to be abstract philosophy and becomes natural history. But you see, it's got abstract again because the rules of what is compatible with what become formal rules outside the organism. Become, in a sense, quote, realities. And That's what reality is. What necessarily is true. Things like the second law of thermodynamics. And all this builds up on certain rather simple premises. First, that in the nature of knowing, it is very rare to find knowledge pickled in the form of that which it is knowledge about. That you may know about butterflies, but you still will not have butterflies in your head. You usually don't have butterflies inside a book. You may have pictures, maybe. A museum is an attempt to do this with collections of butterflies. But on the whole, the thing itself is a very awkward carrier of the knowledge about itself. And you have, therefore, diagrams, words, drawings, etc., which are not butterflies. And if it's inside your head, you have relations between neurons and facilitations of neural pathways and God knows what, which are in the end not butterflies. That's one thing they're surely not. That's the first step of necessary epistemology. That you think you see me. You do not see me. You see an image which you made of me on the basis of a lot of neural tickles on the end of your end organs. You can't see it. The Ding an sich, as Kant called it, is forever inaccessible. And your sense organs are very important filters to keep me out. And what they do is to break the news of me down into little tiny pieces, called end organ twitches, or end organ impulses, to ship those little tiny pieces over your optic nerves, and then to re-synthesize from those little pieces pictures of me. Who looks at pictures? I don't know. Okay. That is, it's like, the lining of your gut. You put complex foodstuffs in, proteins and so on. And the first duty of the gut is to break those down into minute amino acids. And these can be let through into your system, out of which the system then builds its proteins, which are not the proteins of lamb or beef that you put in. Sense organs are very like digestive organs, this sense. And this is a part of the how of knowing. Has to be. Second step in the how of knowing, nothing will get in through this filter unless it is either an event or can be made into an event. That is, states will not get in. This I demonstrate to every class I talk to. All work scholars who've been through SLM know this now. The last year and a half. I make a dot on the blackboard. If I drop my finger on it, I cannot perceive it. move my finger across it, I feel it at once, of course. I recommend you to try on that dot when we're through. That is what I depend upon for news is always difference. And difference in a temporal sequence. Time 1 different from time 2. If something is moving, I can see it moving without moving myself. If something is still, I cannot see it unless I move. Now, in fact, I move my eyes with micronystagmus, as it's called. There's a minute tremor in the eyes, so that in fact the image of that dot tickles different end organs from second to second. And thereby event is created. And this can be reported. It gets into the optic nerve and goes into my experience philosophy, sensorium as it's called, and so on. We're able to do that because we can in fact cancel out the movements of our head or the movements of the micronystagmus. If you take a person's eye, and you take the person, you put them down flat, so they're looking vertical, and now on the front of the cornea you place a little well, the base of it is a plastic lens, what they call contact lens, yes? It's a flat contact lens, it doesn't distort. And on top of the contact lens, there's a little picture arrangement, a little tower with a picture. So that if the eye can see, you can see that picture. But the tower moves with the micronystagmus, and therefore it's stationary relative to the eye. The picture becomes invisible. You can't see, except you cannot receive information except in the form of an event. The event has to be created either by its movement or by your movement or some combination of them. And all the picture we make of states and continuities is made by extrapolation, deduction, induction, something, some sort of a logical process from our experience of events. What we get are the outlines. We make up the chiaroscuro or the continuities between inside of them. And from that, the next step is the combination of differences or events to make events about events and so forth. But that's getting more complicated.
Is that the most effective way of knowing how learning?
The most expensive?
Effective.
Effective. It's the only way, brother.
The only way.
Yeah.
But I mean, what you do is you can making up relationships, several orders.
You make them up. And enormous synthesis, yes. The thing I would use for teaching people is the Ames experiments, of which I wish we had a few here. Do you know those? Edward Ames was an eye man. He's dead. He takes you to a table about 5 feet long, and he has you stand at one end of the table and look at what's on it. And what's on it is a pack of Lucky Strikes at about 2'6" from you, halfway down the table. They're supported on a sort of spine rod, but they're a real packet of Lucky Strikes with the ordinary size of a pack of Lucky Strikes, cigarettes. At the far end of the table is an ordinary book of matches. also supported on a rod. But it is a real book of matches, the ordinary size of a little square book of matches. And Ames has you describe what you see, and that's what you see. He then says, well, now if you lean down, you'll find at the end of the table where you are, there's a vertical plank. Standing up as it might be like that, yes? There's a round hole in it. Will you please stoop down and look through that round hole? Well, you stoop down, you look through the round hole, and he says, what do you see? And, well, you see what you knew was there anyway, yes? What indeed was there. You're at some disadvantage now because you've come down to level with the things, and you've lost your crow's eye view, and of course you've only got one eye working because the hole isn't big enough to accommodate two eyes. Ames then says you can slide that plank sideways. When you do that, you tell me what you see. And you slide this damn plank, and like that, the image changes. The lucky strikes move from the middle of the table to the far end, and they become twice as big. And the matches move from the far end to the middle, and they become doll's house size. What happened? What happened is very simple. But when you slid the plank, you operated under the table a lever, a pair of levers, which moved the objects in the opposite sense to parallax. If you're sitting in the train, you know, the cars on the railroad, beside the railroad track, get left behind first, and the distant mountains seem to come along with you while the cars are going by. And so he puts a lever in so that the near thing will go with you, and the distant thing will get left behind first. And you then make the image to place those objects at the appropriate distances that the false parallax would indicate to. Now, the objects still subtend the same angle at your eye, but if lucky strikes at that end subtended the angle to your eye that they would have if they were here, that they did when they were here, then they would be twice the size, wouldn't they? And the matches correspondingly, they're now half the distance, but they've got to subtend, they've got to be half the size, they're half linear. It's very disturbing to discover how much work you put into your images in order to make them intelligible to yourself. And there's absolutely no doubt about it. This is one of the most traumatic experiences I've ever been through. He had 50 of these experiments in that room. He turned me loose. He was busy in the office, said. And I worked through a number of them. And at a certain point, I was getting a little weary. I'd been doing it for about an hour, I guess. All optical illusions of one sort or another on the problem of depth. It was in an unfurnished apartment in which he had the experiment set up, and there were two folding deck chairs. And by way of taking a rest, I sat down in one of the deck chairs. It instantly collapsed under me. This made an awful noise, and he came out from the office and asked me how I was getting on. And he said, well, anyway, there's one experiment I want you to see before we leave. And we went through that. This was even more distorting and confusing and brain-addling operation than the others. And then he said, what about going to get lunch? Yes. Would you like to wash your hands? Yes. And I went into the bathroom of this Park Avenue apartment, otherwise unfurnished. And I turned the faucet marked C, and I got a jet of steam. My faith in the world was very, very severely shaken. And when we got down on the street, I could not cross the street. You know, I didn't believe in my information about the traffic. Faith is a damned important business, particularly faith in your own creation of the pictures of the world in which you think you're living. That's epistemology for you. The miracle is that we are able to believe it. We used to watch the little geckos in Hawaii, little lizards. And at night, when the lamps were on, they would come out onto the mosquito screens to wait for the moths. Moths would come to the lamps. And you've got a gecko on the screen, like that, and a moth lands here. The gecko turns like that. It's very quick. Now nothing happens at all. The moth makes a move and the gecko goes and gets it. But you can't see the gecko, see the moth, you see, until the moth makes a move. He got the first one and responded. Now to get the next one, he has to wait. And there's a famous paper called What the Frog's Eye Told the Frog's Brain by Warren McCulloch and others from the MIT labs, which is the beginning of a whole raft of experiments on the physiology of perception. Very simple. You take an eye of a newt or a frog in this case, you put electrodes on the optic nerve, and you see what events in front of the eye will in fact send a message down the optic nerve. And the answer for a frog is a moving object subtending less than 10 degrees. If it doesn't move or subtends too many degrees, it doesn't get registered. Its epistemology is different from yours. And of course everybody around the room has more or less different epistemology. First at the sensory level and then on up in how you build up stuff, build up, quote, ideas.
Where does aesthetics fit in?
Where does aesthetics fit in?
Is that where it fits in?
I think the way to come at the question of where does aesthetics fit in is by the back door. We live in a world, certainly it's the biological world in which we live, and I think aesthetics is a purely biological business. I don't think mountains are beautiful, except by some sort of symbolic extension from people, effort, such things. Now, a person is a very complicated, internally modulated object. It's gone through how many million years of evolution in which the instructions for its creation were modulated from generation to generation, little by little, layer by layer. That's one side of it. The sort of image I have in my mind is of Goldberg variations, for example, Bach modulations, modulation and modulations, and modulation is how he modulated the modulations. a little more complicated than your consciousness will handle. This works better. Okay, but then it's also true that an organic form is modulated in the present. If you look at a column of vertebrae, for example, each vertebra is a modulation of the previous one, and each group of vertebrae is a modulation of each group, and so on. And you get these. A chicken went away. The anatomy of the chicken is a mass of internal modulations, and I suggested to you that your hand looked prettier if you thought of it as a bunch of relations instead of a bunch of things, parts, right? Now, what have we done? If one suggests that aesthetics has something to do with a recognition of those systems of modulation, anything can be a pattern if you hear it twice or see it twice. But if I lead you up and down the garden path in certain ways with certain sorts of illusion, I can give you certain sorts of pain. So there's a problem of ugliness. The case I use mainly to annoy medical people is that of Still's lesion. Do you have any medics here in the room? Bona fide MDs? Not one? Too bad, they're fun. One got one. Do you know what Still's lesion is?
I know what Still's disease is. I know what Still's lesion is.
Well, it may be the same. Still was the founder of osteopathy. Right? Same, good. In the latter half of the 19th century. And he got, it's really a highly aesthetic idea for the matter of that, the idea that everything in the body is controlled by a communication system, and this communication system has to pass through headquarters in the spinal cord. Spinal cord is the central exchange of messages for organizing the whole body. He therefore argued that any state of the body could be corrected by doing something to the message system as it all came together in the spinal cord. And he assumed that you could cure measles that way. It's probably not correct. Anyway, he had a sort of pre-cybernetic idea in the 1860s, 1870s, which was a frightfully powerful idea, which he was having at least 100 years before the world was due for it. And he got kicked out of the medical profession fairly rapidly. And he went, I think, a little mad. I mean, insane. Anyway, if you go to an osteopath, he will, or he usually now has a little instrument, an electronic device. But what he does is to run his fingers, usually 2 fingers, down, one on each side of the sequence of spines on your vertebral column. And he is feeling for a discord, essentially, in the harmony of rhythmic tensions of the muscles on those vertebrae down that sequence. And when he feels a disjunction, a contrast, an inappropriate contradiction in those tensions, he says, Still's lesion. And he then puts his knee in your navel and he takes a firm grip on one shoulder on one side and the other shoulder on the other. He does that, you do that. And that breaks that piece of tension there. and you may feel better. Is that the same as Still's disease?
No,
No. But the same old Still, yes?
same one.
The same man. He was no doubt a very remarkable man. A hell of a disciplinarian, trained his students till they were falling off their perches. And they, to this day, osteopaths know more neuromuscular skeletal anatomy than anybody else. They just are better trained. They don't know anything about what's in your abdomen. You heard a difference. I guess that's it.
I guess you respond.
This should make sense.
Thank you.